All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. First of all, thank you for joining. And this is Bob Schimek. I am the Senior Director at Postal Affairs here at Satori Software. For those of you that may not know me, I recently had the opportunity to join Satori Software. I've had the majority of my history actually with the Postal Soft line of products. I spent close to 20 years working on those, and as many of you know, the pre-sort technology from the SAP Postal Soft technology has now come over to Satori Software, and I'm very excited to join the team and be a part of moving these products forward and keeping them up with the most current happenings going on in the Postal Service, which is really what this whole web event is about, is to fill everyone in on what's going on there. Just to give you a little bit more background about me and some of the things that I'm involved in, I am the MTAC representative, one of the MTAC representatives for IDEA Alliance, so I regularly attend MTAC. I sit on the Postcom Board of Directors, actively involved over there, helping to drive their membership. And I am also responsible for the evolution of the mail.dat specification for IDEA Alliance. So I'm actively involved in changes to mail.dat and everything associated with electronic documentation. I'm very much looking forward to representing Satori and Satori's customers as we move forward into a very interesting year that we have coming. So I've got a wide variety of different topics that I'm going to be spending some time talking about, and part of this is, if nothing else, can serve as a tune-up for the National Postal Forum that is kicking off next week, and get you thinking about some of the things that are going on. It's crazy to think that we're already just over 2 weeks left of the first quarter of the year, and we've already got that much of the year already behind us. Things are moving quickly, and there's been a lot of activity going on in the Postal Service. So we'll jump into today's agenda and kind of walk through a wide variety of things. So the first thing I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about is there's some new names and faces at the Postal Service. And so I've listed them up here in no particular order, but we'll just kind of walk through them. The first one is the retirement of Paul Vogel. So for those of you that may or may not know, Paul Vogel has had a long history at the Postal Service. Actually, this is his second retirement. He retired back in December of 2010. At that point in time, he was the Chief Marketing and Sales Officer for the Postal Service. He was retired for I think about a year and a half, and then came back and was working in the role of President of Digital Solutions for about the last year or so, not quite a year. I think he stepped into that role around May of 2012, and so he recently announced that he is retiring again. And so now with his retirement, the Postmaster General has announced Randy Muskanek as their new VP of Secure Digital Solutions moving forward. I had the opportunity to actually meet Randy, 2 weeks ago now, down at the IDEA Alliance Print Distribution Conference. He actually spoke there. For those of you that may not have heard a whole lot about what's going on with the Postal Service and where they're going with their digital solutions, not a lot was known until about the last MTAC or so, where Paul Vogel started it, and now Randy is starting to continue the conversation. One of their first pilots that they're looking at is going to be a email service where you would be able to log on as a customer, and when you logged in, you would be able to see all of your inbound packages and mail that would be coming, that is en route to be delivered to your post office box. And so this is one of the first areas that the Postal Service is starting to stick their toe in the water when it comes to digital solutions. So they're starting to have conversations with the industry about that and how they can start connecting more information to that physical mail piece. For example, there are discussions going on about being able to provide a link from that physical mail piece to potentially like a website that would give you more information about the particular offer that may be associated with an inbound mail piece. So it's one of those things that we're going to have to continue to watch. I know Randy is going to be talking at the National Postal Forum. It would probably be, if you're able to be out there, it would be a good one to take a look at and see where the Postal Service is going in that regard. Next, I want to just note two other recent appointments that the Postmaster General has made. The first one being Jeff Williamson is now stepping into the role of Chief Human Resources Officer and Executive VP. Previously, Jeff had been announced as the VP of Pricing, and he's been in that role for about 6 months, and was really helping to kind of drive this most recent price change through that went into effect in January. So now, with Jeff moving into his new role, they've also announced that Cynthia Sanchez-Hernandez is the one that is going to be taking over as the new VP of Pricing. So her background is a little bit more in the finance area. So I know there are many of us in the industry that are going to be interested in seeing what her stance is and kind of what her thoughts are as she steps into this new role of pricing, because pricing plays a critical part in mailer behavior as far as, you know, trying to signal what might be, for example, the most cost-efficient way to prepare mail. So all of these are kind of some interesting announcements and maybe some new faces to be looking for out at the National Postal Forum. All right, for the next two slides, I wanted to just talk a little bit about an interesting thing that the Postal Service shared at the last MTAC meeting. The next two slides actually came from Jim Cochran, and one of the things that the Postal Service has been doing now as more and more mail is moving into full service, they are able to track it more closely in the Postal Service systems, and they're starting to see some interesting trends. And so this is one of the interesting trends that they did identify, and that is, if you look at the huge spike of inbound mail coming in on Friday. So just to do a quick recap of what this is sharing here is, it's looking at the Postal Service's first quarter. So first quarter for the Postal Service is October through December. So this is really the fall mailing season, the heavy mailing volume. And this is showing only the mail being drop shipped into the SCF facility. So this is kind of an indication of what the SCF networks are receiving on a daily basis. And so the numbers at the top are the number of pieces that were received during that quarter, and then the numbers at the bottom are the number of drop ship appointments that were received. And so the interesting thing about this slide is that you can see the mailer behavior in the area of flats, and that over 50% of the mail pieces and dropship appointments are coming in on Friday. And so again, this is a lot of this has to do with the result of what I refer to as all the different co-opportunities, co-mailing, co-palletization. You know, it's bringing mail together to take it as deep into the system as possible, and so you can earn the best dropship discounts and also get the best delivery service by getting it deeper into the Postal Service system. So now when you get that huge spike coming in every single Friday, it had an interesting side effect for the Postal Service's service performance, in that when they got that huge spike on Fridays, that's where the vast majority of Fridays and Saturdays is the vast majority of where their service performance failures occurred. And so it's indicating that, you know, their ability to handle that spike every Friday is to some extent maxing them out, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it. And so one of the things that they're currently looking at is how can they better account for that, and is that going to be a standard practice moving forward? For example, it might become an interesting discussion if we look at going from 6-day delivery to 5-day for letters and flats. And you know, the question then becomes, okay, if Saturday delivery goes away, what does that mean for mailer behaviors? Does that mean that this spike that we're currently seeing on Fridays is going to push back to Thursday, or is there, or is it going to continue to stay on Friday with then, more mail getting queued up to be delivered for, Monday, Tuesday delivery? Because a lot of this is indicating if mailers are dropping at the SCF on Friday, the overall goal is that they would like to see those mail pieces then arriving Tuesday, probably around the Tuesday time frame. And so is there a way for the Postal Service to manage this better and reduce the number of failures? Because as you see the line on the top, their best service performance ends up being Thursday. So it's like they get hit really hard on Friday, and then they spend the weekend and the beginning part of the week digging out from that, and then kind of get recovered on Thursday all to get slammed again one more time. And so I think the Postal Service is really taking a close look at how can they change that behavior, and not necessarily change behavior, but how can they account for that spike, knowing that it's going to be regularly coming for them, and what might change in that spike if we look at going from 6-day delivery to 5. All right, the next thing that I wanted to talk about was a change that's going to be coming in July related to how postage is being calculated. And so I brought up this slide because the primary change that's going to be happening is going to be in that total discount column right there in the center. And so what I'll probably end up doing is maybe jumping back to the slide after I show you the next one. So what's really going on here to convert the little formula here on the screen to English is that the Postal Service is going to make a change in July to Postal 1 on how it's calculating postage. And in English terms, the primary change is they are going to calculate your postage, take off the full service discount, and then if you are actively involved in any type of incentive program, your incentive calculation will be based off of the postage amount after the full service discount has already been taken off. And so I guess the opposite way of saying this is right now that incentive discount that is being calculated, if you're participating in an incentive, was being done before the full service discount was being removed. So the net result is your incentive is going to be calculated on a slightly smaller postage amount because they're taking that full service discount off. If it's first class, it's 3/10 of a cent per piece, and then 1/10 for standard mail. So in July, your calculated discount that will end up going into the total discount column over here is going to end up becoming a slightly smaller calculation or slightly smaller amount when the July release of Postal 1 is deployed. So that's something, one of the things that is important for software providers is that making sure that the postage that's being calculated by our software applications matches what is being calculated by Postal 1. And so one of the things that everyone's going to need to do is make sure we align around this change in the way an incentive discount, the incentive calculation is occurring. All right, next I've kind of identified a handful of other hot topics kind of broken out by class of mail that I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about. The first one being the first class single piece thing. This has been a very active discussion with the Postal Service ever since the initial price change was filed, and the conversations are still continuing on today. And the big controversy is around the fact that the Postal Service came out with the retail price of 46 cents and the commercial price for 1 and 2 ounce mail at 48 cents. So you actually have a commercial rate that is more expensive than a retail rate. And so there's been a lot of discussion with the Postal Service about when it is appropriate to use 46 cents and when it's appropriate to use 48 cents. Kind of walking through the entire history of that, initially the Postal Service had stated that for an all 1 ounce mailing, it had never been their intent for an all 1 ounce mailing to pay 48 cents. And so they had put together a set of documentation that had said that, if you have an all 1 ounce mailing, it would still be possible to claim 46 cents. But if you had any mixture of 1 and 2 ounce or 1, 2, 3, and 3.5 ounce, then you were at that point where you had a mixed mailing, you would be required to use the commercial rate, which would be the 48 cents. And so there had been there was actually MTAC task team that was pulled together to work on this, and they ended up putting together a whole bunch of information on exactly how this should be structured and how it would work. And I think it ended up being close to like a 14-page document that laid out all, several different scenarios and exactly how it was supposed to work. So as a part of that, the Postal Service also had to file some clarifications with the PRC. And so one of the things that was still an unknown as we went through the holidays and actually the rates got implemented was whether or not the PRC was going to approve that change. Well, one of the more recent things that happened is the PRC came back and basically rejected the clarifications that the Postal Service was intending to make around it. So then that now raised up a whole bunch of additional questions about, okay, now that the PRC rejected that, what does it really mean? Well, it means we kind of go back to what the Postal Service originally filed. So there were additional discussions that took place with the Postal Service after that where, it was still the Postal Service's intent that if you had residual mail coming off of a pre-sorted mailing, that you were required to pay the 48 cents, whether it was 1 ounce, 1 ounce or 2 ounces, or a blend of both. And so one of the things that was talked about was that the Postal Service really didn't have a way to enforce it, and there really wasn't a way to identify, there really isn't a way to identify commercial single piece versus retail single piece. There isn't a separate unique marking or anything like that. So the Postal Service had proposed that they were going to update the certification section of the postage statement to basically say if a mailer is claiming the 46 cents, they are also certifying that these pieces that they're claiming at 46 cents were not part of a pre-sorted mailing. And so that's kind of where we thought things were going to be going. Now, the latest news that I have on this is that may be changing. So there's always been some question about, can the Postal Service really not allow an individual or a mailer, a commercial mailer, the ability to use a retail rate? And retail rates should be available to anyone that chooses to use them. And so apparently there's been some discussions between Postal Service lawyers and lawyers that are at Postcom, and it's sounding like the Postal Service is backing away from updating the certification section of the postage statement. So now what does that all mean? Well, that's a great question. As best we can tell at this point in time is that it looks like if a mailer wants to use the 1 or 2 ounce retail rate for any mailing for any mail pieces that fall out of a mailing, including a commercial mailing, it looks like that retail rate should be available to them. We're still trying to verify that that's the case and making sure that the dust is truly settled on this, but it's looking like, at least for the next year, mailers may have the opportunity to use the retail rate on 1 ounce pieces that fall out of a commercial mailing. It's looking like that might be possible. So stay tuned on this one. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more discussion going on with the Postal Service about this out at National Postal Forum and in other venues as well. So that's kind of first-class single piece in a nutshell, as best I can tell at this point in time. The next thing I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about is some changes that are coming in the area of periodicals. So first of all, PMOD, just to make sure we're all on the same page with what that is. It stands for Priority Mail, Open and Distribute. And so priority mail open and distribute is typically used for time-sensitive periodicals. Typically what's happening is they're taking a periodical mail piece, putting it into an airbox or into a sack, and it's getting put onto a plane, being flown to a particular destination, and you could think of it as kind of like periodical drop ship. When the airbox or the container arrives at the destination, it's opened, and those the periodical mail pieces inside get entered into the Postal Service system almost as though they were being drop shipped. The use of airboxes has always kind of been an informal thing. It's been going on in the industry for quite a while, but it's never really been formally supported by software. And so one of the things that the Postal Service is proposing to do is formalize that a little bit more and actually look for software providers to be able to support it, and then actually also have Postal One be able to understand it and deal with it as well. And so right now we are still working with the Postal Service to figure out what the exact preparation requirements are for this. But one of the things that we do know is that so airboxes come in a variety of different sizes, and so and they do depend on which airlines you're using. So if you're flying some of your periodical mail to the West Coast through one airline, it may be a different size box, and if you're flying some of your pieces to, for example, let's say the East Coast and using the different airline. And so to help provide some structure around what the costing would be, especially in the periodical world where you have a cost for each piece, a cost for each bundle, a cost for each container, the Postal Service is saying if you make an airbox and the airbox weighs more than 70 pounds, you're going to give it a pallet charge and for intents and purposes treat it as a pallet. If the airbox happens to weigh 70 pounds or less, then you can treat it essentially like a sack, and it would get a sack charge instead. And the large airboxes, as I understand it, typically come in probably, when you fill them up, they're going to come in around 200 pounds. And so it looks like the majority of the airboxes would actually end up being larger than 70 pounds. They would get the pallet charge. There's also, they're working on putting structure and preparation requirements around it where every pallet box or airbox would end up, each airbox would end up having pallet placards on them and essentially be treated like a pallet. So the Postal Service would be able to scan the pieces and track them. They would be looking for them to have uniqueness requirements around it as well for unique container IDs and if these are going to be part of a full service mailing. As I noted, the exact sortation levels that are going to be required and or be optional are still under discussion, but this is something that is coming down the road, and we're going to be seeing more around it. One of the requirements that we do expect that we're going to have to deal with is the fact that, if you're doing if you're drop shipping to multiple airlines and going to multiple destinations for lack of a better term, on an entry point by entry point basis, you may have to be able to define different size airboxes associated with each one of them to have the necessary flexibility to do all of this. One thing to call out is if you look at the actual mail.dat specification, there is a value for airbox, but there is no definition of airbox size in the mail.dat specification. But we're still trying to figure out if we need a more granular definition or if that's going to be sufficient for what we're going to be doing. Now the last item that I've got on this slide is referring to would end up impacting flats, primarily periodical and standard mail, and that is the Postal Service has recently added new information to the mail direction file. And what they're going to now allow is if you take a 5-digit pallet to where the 5-digit mail destined for an FSS machine, and you actually take it to where the FSS machine is located, you can qualify for the DSCF discount. And so really what this is geared towards is there are a handful of situations where the FSS machine is not located at the same place as the SCF facility. And so right now, today, you take all your mail to the SCF facility, all the stuff that, if that's not where the FSS machine is located, all the flat mail that is going to get processed on the FSS machine ends up getting transferred over to the other facility, gets processed on the FSS machine, and then comes back through the SCF. This is allowing mailers to just take it directly to the machine and avoid that cross-dock operation at the SCF facility. So for anyone that has, for example, a time-sensitive publication, this would allow you to get it directly to the machine, and you might be able to save, for example, a day in delivery off of that by being able to take it directly to the machine versus taking it to the SCF facility, which ends up cross-docking it. All right, so I've got a handful of other topics just to touch on, again, as we're dealing with all the changes that are coming in the Postal Service side. Next one, I was going to just spend a little bit of time talking about the full service technology credit. For those of you that I would suspect most of you may have heard about this, if you mail more than 125,000 pieces annually, you can qualify for this technology credit. At 125,000 pieces annually, it is a $2,000 credit, and then that credit does go as high as $5,000 if you mail as much as 2 million annually. The Postal Service is in the process of sending out letters to mailers to notify them of their eligibility for this technology credit. The intent is for it to help defray the cost of making the investment in full service mail. It is my understanding that everyone, by the end of this week, anyone that the Postal Service sees as being eligible for the technology credit should have received a letter by the end of this week. So if you have not received a letter by the end of this week and you do believe you are eligible, then you are highly encouraged to contact the Postal Service and have a conversation with them around this technology credit and eligibility. The one qualifier for this is that this is still subject to approval by the PRC. The Postal Service is, they've kind of done the math, they've identified who they believe is eligible for the credit, they're sending out notification of that eligibility through letters, but they still have not officially submitted the request to the PRC to do this. Assuming the PRC gives the okay, the time frame for this is it's looking like the Postal Service is intending to allow mailers to be able to start using this technology credit with the deployment of their July release of the Postal One system. So in July, I believe July 14th is the date that Postal One is scheduled to be deployed. Assuming all of this gets approved and everything gets squared away, you would then be able to submit full service mailing and be able to use this credit towards your postage costs. So if you have any more questions about that, feel free to queue them up on the right-hand corner, and I can do my best to try and answer them at the end of this session. The next thing that I want to just touch on is the next version of mail.dat. Up until about a couple of weeks ago, we were kind of moving full steam ahead as an industry with mail.dat 13-2. 13-2 was going to be the new version of mail.dat that would go into effect in July with the Postal Service's new July release of Postal One on July 14th. We ended up processing a number of different change requests, and after we ended up getting through and processing everything, we kind of looked at it, and the Postal Service said, is this really big enough and enough changes to the specification to warrant a new version of mail.dat, or can we treat it just as, for lack of a better term, it's really not an errata, but an errata to 13-1. And so we ended up talking about it as an industry, and there's really two primary changes to the specification that I would say were like over and above what would be considered an errata. The first one is the Postal Service added a new value to the specification to be able to indicate business saturation. So this is kind of an indicator that to everyone that the Postal Service is looking like they're going to be proposing a new rate Most likely there would be some preparation changes associated with that, but roughly in the July timeframe, there's going to be this new thing coming that is business saturation. And as I understand it, you're choosing to drop mail to every single business on a given route, but not necessarily the residential deliveries. And so I don't really have a whole lot of details about it. The Postal Service really hasn't shared what the preparation requirements associated with it are going to be, but we do know that the new value is there and would be able to be used essentially starting in July. The next thing is the Postal Service has indicated their intention to support the SFR record in mail.dat. So what is the SFR record? The SFR record is a special services and fees record. So it's basically a way of dealing with surcharges, requesting additional services and fees, and then also being able to pay for that. Historically, the Postal Service has not supported that through mail.dat, but with their July release, they are intending to support that. As they were going through the information that was currently in the SFR record, we did come across a couple of values that were missing from the SFR record that needed to be added. And so part of this errata is adding some new values to the SFR record for things that the Postal Service wanted to be able to account for on a postage statement but had not officially been added to the SFR record. So we've got those in there and they're available now. So the decision that's been made is we are not going to have a new version of mail.dat. It's just going to be a 13-1 errata, and that will be, the industry and the Postal Service will begin using the errata on July 14th. That's the plan. The other thing that this raised was a question around whether or not, what does that mean for 12-2? So the key thing to point out here is the Postal Service is going, and the industry are going to continue to support 12-2 as an active version of mail.dat with one caveat. And that caveat is, with the July release of Postal 1, the Postal Service will no longer be accepting the IMR record. So, the IMR record is already daggered in 12-2. We know it was going away, and so the Postal Service remains committed to the fact that, if you are doing full service mailings, you have to submit the detail through either the PDR record, the piece detail record, or the PBC, which is the piece barcode record, and not the IMR, which is essentially a range-based record. So the Postal Service is moving away from that. They won't accept it in July. So 12-2 continues to be a viable version, but if you're still using IMRs, you're going to have to switch your software over to start creating either PDRs or PBCs. All right, the next thing was to spend a little bit of time talking about the IDEA Alliance user license code. And so one of the things that the industry's been doing is working with the Postal Service to help reduce the barriers for mailers to get into full service. There's the continued migration. Some of you are already there. Some of you may be in progress. Some of you may not have started yet. And so one of the things is to be able to do eDoc and do it through mail.dat, you are required to purchase a user license code from IDEA Alliance. As of January, IDEA Alliance has worked with the software providers and the industry as a whole to change the way that they're licensing it, where now software providers have the ability to provide user license codes to their customers on their behalf. And so what you may find is many of you, if you do not already have a user license code and need to get one, you should be able to get one without the cost of actually having to purchase one. All you have to do is reach out to us here at Satori, and if you don't have a user license code, we can get you one. And so that is a nice feature that, what the goal is to help continue to streamline the process as mailers are continue to move into the full service world. All right, and the last topic I have on this slide is 5-day delivery versus 6-day delivery. And all I can do is say, hang on and let's see where this one goes, because when the decisions get put in the hands of the politicians, who knows what's going to happen, and that's really where it's at. What we do know is, Pat Donahoe has come out and said, is their intent in August to go to 5-day delivery of letters and cards and flats, and continue to do 6-day delivery for packages. So everyone, the Postal Service, that's their marching orders to start getting ready and be prepared for doing that in August. Now, as I understand it, in the continuing resolution for the whole funding the government thing, the politicians have continued to keep in the rider that requires the Postal Service to deliver 6 days a week. So, Pat is saying he wants to and needs to move to 5-day. The politicians have continued to keep the 6-day rider in the bill. So at this point in time, it's just a hang on and let's see where this really ends up. But I can tell you that, at least within the Postal Service, they have their marching orders to prepare for going to 5-day delivery, and there's a lot of activities going on in that regard. Will that actually happen in August? I guess we're going to have to wait and see. All right, next I just wanted to quickly touch on an upcoming webinar that we're going to be having. As you all know, next week is the National Postal Forum. I'm sure it's going to be a crazy busy week for everyone. And then coming off of that, one of the things that we are going to do is kind of do a debrief of the National Postal Forum and kind of try and highlight some of the things that we heard, saw, talked about at the Postal Service while we were out there. So obviously everyone is welcome to join us, and we look forward to having that discussion and any questions and comments that you have. So that's my little tour, I guess, of the Postal Service and things that are going on right now. At this point in time, I will open it up to any questions that anyone might have. Again, feel free to enter your questions in the lower right-hand corner, and we will work our way through them. All right, our first question is, will the full service mail.dat requirements most likely require the attention of our IT department, or does bulk mailer take care of it all? That's a good question. One of the things that is going to be going on is that the Postal Service is in the process of simplifying the process of getting into EDOC, and right now that requires what is called TEM testing, and TEM stands for Test Environment for Mailers. For those of you that have already gone through the TEM process, you know it's a very long, complex, involved process, and that it varied anywhere from a couple of days to a couple of weeks. The Postal Service is looking to greatly simplify that process and has been working with the software providers to simplify the process of getting into TEM and getting into full service, to the point where if you are using a certified, or well, I shouldn't say certified, if you use a TEM tested product and approved product by the Postal Service, your testing can be as simple as one job, where you create a mail.dat. It's primarily, making sure you understand what you know what your mid and your crit is. You put that into your mail.dat, you submit it to the Postal Service, and you can be done. And And so I can tell you bulk mailer is one of those approved products. It is listed out on the Postal Service site and will allow you to do that simplified process. Again, this simplified process is a work in progress, and the Postal Service should be rolling it out very shortly. So expect to hear more about that soon. All right, the next question is, I thought I read somewhere that the post office is going to require everyone to use full service in intelligent mail barcode. Is this true? If so, what is the time frame for doing so? The answer is, if you want to continue to get automation rates, yes, the Postal Service in January of 2014 will be requiring full service, not just IMB basic, but you to be full service compliant if you want to be able to claim automation discounts. And so that is something that the Postal Service is sticking to their guns on. They're saying that date is not going to change, and so everyone in the industry needs to start moving in that direction. So again, if you want to be able to continue to claim automation rates beyond January of 2014, you need to be doing full service to do that. Next question is, will Satori offer future webinars on some of the basics surrounding full service IMB or other services by the Postal Service? Yes, we definitely will be. So continue to keep an eye out for that. I know Kim is doing one tomorrow. And so I encourage you to all attend that one. And yes, as we go through this next year, I think you'll be hearing regularly from Kim and myself on various topics related to full service and getting ready for what is coming in January 2014. All right. The next question is, we are ready to start the transition from basic to full service. What is the first step? That's a great question. I would say that it's probably a longer conversation than what I would be able to provide in an answer here. I would recommend that you call into Satori support, and we can first get a better understanding of what you are currently doing, making sure that we understand, do you have your mid, do you have your cred, do you have all your mids for all your customers if you're a service provider, getting those types of questions answered, and then from there starting to work through, for example, the e-doc process, getting into TAM, making sure you get approval for that, and then starting to, the biggest hurdle, or the first hurdle to get over is going to be, making sure that you're providing the required e-doc information to the Postal Service, and then the other thing is that you are retaining uniqueness, not only uniqueness on all of your individual pieces that are being mailed, but also on your containers, sacks, trays, handling units such as pallets, all require that they're unique and that you're printing the most current barcoded container tags associated with those. So there's a number of different things just to make sure. There's a checklist of items to go through to make sure that you're ready. Next question is, we have not started the process to become full service. Should we wait for some of these easier steps to start? Well, I would say that a lot, the one simplification item which I refer to as the TEM testing, that's going to be right around the corner, like within the next, I would sure expect, by the end of this month that information will be rolled out and be available to customers. I can tell you that, the listing of authorized vendors is already posted out at the Postal Service site. So, they're very close to being able to roll it out. And so, you know, I highly encourage everyone to not wait and begin that process now. You know, if you think about it, you know, as soon as mailers hit August, it quickly becomes the busy mailing season again, and you're going to be dealing with that. So there's this window of opportunity, I would say, from the end of March to the end of July, where this is your best window to go through the process. Make sure that you can ensure that you can do a full service mailing, even if you're not intending to do it for every single mailing right now until we get to January 2014. That's fine. But one of the things you do want to do is get in there, prove to yourself that you can do it, and then the other thing is once you've done a couple of full service mailings, there are a number of different reports on the business customer gateway of the Postal Service that you can log in. Log in there and see what the results of your mailings are. And for example, you know, it can give you indications of if there's any problems with, for example, maintaining uniqueness and you know, maybe, you know, if there's any type of issues around, for example, barcode quality, those types of things. So, you know, I would recommend, you know, just get in the habit of doing a couple of mailings, you know, through full service, just to make sure that you can do it and you're able to see the results from it, and the results are what you expect. Because if they're not what you expect, you still got time to get them corrected before we get to January. All right. I don't believe we have any other questions at this time. So I guess one last call if anyone has anything else. All right, if there are no other questions, I'd like to thank you for joining me today, and please take our short survey. We'd love to have your feedback on if you found this useful, and thank you for joining.